Hi, everybody. This is July 11th, 2026, and I've been posting these videos about the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Kieran's 64 with Down syndrome, be locked away by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government. David Eby as leader, Nikki Sharma as Attorney General, and Sheila Malcolmson as the minister responsible for Paul's care. So Paul was locked away in his group home when I complained to the police after I discovered what I alleged to be a fraudulent and forged power of attorney government created to give Paul the COVID-19 shot in February of 2021. This was done in secret, although Paul had six other siblings at the time, and it's supposed to be done publicly and filed online, which was never done. The government appointed my then 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, who had only met Paul on a few occasions over the course of his life. She moved out when he was born. She didn't understand his speech or communication. And when she was the trustee or the executor of my father's will, she gave Paul's entire inheritance to the government. Secretly. I found that out later too. So I went to the RCMP police, and the constable that I spoke with met with me and pretended to take my complaint seriously, but what she said she was going to get a search warrant for the original power of attorney with Paul's signature on it, or the forged signature on it. She didn't do that. What she did instead was she tipped off the group home that I had complained, and I got a letter from the group home's lawyer saying I would never see my brother again. Now, my two other sisters and I in Greater Vancouver, and my mother had cared for Paul on weekends and holidays. He basically grew up in he did grow up in a home environment, and then when he was an adult in group homes, we took him on weekends and holidays. But the nun never did. The nun never, as I said, only met him a few times over the course of his life. So for 588 days, David Eby locked Paul away. I was his last surviving family member and visitor, and he was my last surviving family member in Greater Vancouver. And so he was locked away and isolated as if he was in prison. Because when we were together, when I had him on weekends, I took him to Newfoundland twice. I took him to Seattle. We went to the P&E every year, the Pacific National Exhibition. We just went on outings every weekend. So he didn't have any of that. He didn't understand what was going on. Eventually, they let us have a 10-minute telephone call once a week, and he begged me to visit him. He said he would do vacuuming for me. He thought that it was something, he hadn't behaved properly, or if only he could figure out the right thing to do, they would let him visit me. It was the cruelest thing I've ever personally seen. Now, this group home that Paul was in was run by a quasi-Catholic, Roman Catholic organization called L'Arche, L''ARCHE. L'Arche was founded by the son of a former Governor General of Canada. A man, he was a retired naval officer named Jean Vanier. And he founded L'Arche about 60 years ago, and then it came out after his death in 2019 that he had been sexually abusing the workers and the volunteers at the group homes around the world for 60 years. And he was just on the brink of being appointed to the Order of Canada. So he and another defrocked priest had set up L'Arche as basically a pipeline to have access to the young women who volunteered and who worked and lived in these communities or these group homes for mentally handicapped adults. So it was a very dark and nefarious organization to begin with. And as I said, not really Catholic, but quasi-Catholic, because Jean Vanier was not a priest, and the man that he set up these group homes with was a defrocked Catholic priest. So in the 588 days that they locked Paul away, I went to court practically every day, did everything I could dream of to try and restore Paul's visits, but I was never successful in doing so. I went to the Supreme Court of Canada twice. And then on April 15th of 2024, I got an email from my sister's lawyer. Now, the Catholic Church had spent, I estimate, they had two law firms, one in Ottawa, Charles Gibson, and one in Greater Vancouver, Borden, Ladner, Gervais, with Casey Deanshaw, working around the clock for my sister. And I estimate that the Catholic Church spent at least $2 million in legal fees and expenses. Even though they had written me a letter, my own parish priest had written me a letter of support as being the appropriate person to be the guardian of my brother. So on the one hand, my parish priest wrote me a letter of support. The nun had no letter of support from anyone at all. And then the Catholic Church spent, as I said, more than $2 million. And I've been a devout Catholic my whole life. I was baptized at birth, and I contributed to the collection every Sunday my whole life. But the Catholic Church spent over $2 million supporting this fraudulent and forged power of attorney that gave my sister, 4,000 kilometers away, authority over every aspect of my little brother's life, and locked him away. The reason they locked him away was they didn't want me to be able to get an authentic sample of a signature, although I have hundreds of those samples of a signature. And they didn't want me to have him tested by a psychologist to show that he was too low functioning to appoint a guardian. And that's why this document was a fraudulent forgery. But on April 15th of 2024, I got an email at about 8 o'clock at night from the nun's Vancouver lawyer, Casey Deanshaw. And he said that Paul had had a stroke. He was at Burnaby Hospital, and I could come and visit him. I could arrange through this little twerp of a insolent, incompetent lawyer, Casey Deanshaw. I could arrange through him, this sadistic little creep. I could arrange a visit with my own brother. I dropped everything. I raced to the hospital, and they let me have a visit for 10 minutes a day. When the nuns could see that Paul wasn't going to die, that he was recovering remarkably well, she flew in from Ontario, and she let me. I waited outside of the ward in the hallway for 10 to 12 hours a day. But I was only allowed to visit with Paul. But I could see he was recovering remarkably well. And when I saw him, he grabbed my hand. When I said, "Paul, it's Kathleen," he squeezed it so tight I thought he was going to crush it. He had an oxygen mask and a ventilator on, and he had all kinds of medical supports. But he sat up, he grabbed a book from my hand, turned the pages perfectly, understood what I was saying. He made good eye contact. He was struggling so hard to survive. Paul loved life. I mean, life was so unbelievably cruel to him. But he was just such a hero, such a valiant person. He struggled so hard. He had a speech impediment, but he struggled so hard to communicate and to get his message across. And people really went out of their way to try and understand him. So he was improving. I was surprised. I was shocked at how, but people don't die of strokes anymore. While I was at the hospital, I got a telephone call from a staff sergeant at the Burnaby RCMP office. And he said that they had been ordered, the Burnaby RCMP, that's the police, had been ordered by their Ottawa Oversight Agency, Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP, to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And I was thrilled. I thought, oh my God, this is a breakthrough. This is the breakthrough. Finally, somebody's going to listen to Paul and pay attention, and he'll be free from being locked away by this evil nun and the Catholic Church and the government of British Columbia. But as soon as I went to court the next morning to ask a judge to suspend the nun's authority over Paul pending the RCMP investigation, but we didn't get on. And by the time I got back to the hospital, I knew that Paul had to die, because the nun's reasoning was that if Paul was dead, then there would be no investigation into this fraudulent document. And she was right. So when I got back to the hospital, she met me at the door. She had moved Paul into a room where it was only her and only Paul. And she met me at the door. She wouldn't look me in the eye. And one thing I've learned is I was a government psychologist for the government of British Columbia, and then a federal prosecutor for the government of Canada, and then a family lawyer. I was hired and trained as a family lawyer by the new head of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, Carrie Lynn Finlay. But she wouldn't look me in the eye, and all she said was, "Say goodbye to Paul, he's dying." Well, he appeared to already be dead to me. I've seen dead people before. Practically everyone in my family, my immediate family, has passed away. His eyes were wide open, his pupils were dilated and fixed, and he was completely still. All of his medical supports, including his oxygen mask and his ventilator, had been removed, and now he appeared to have been sedated to death. Now, there's no reason for him to have been sedated at all, because he was recovering from a stroke. He was struggling very hard to recover from a stroke. But I could see the nurse, the nun, my evil nun sister, was in cahoots with the doctor, and she had ordered him to remove all of Paul's. When she found out that the police were going to investigate the document, Paul had to die, and he had to die quick. And all of Paul's medical supports had been removed, and he had been sedated to death. I believe that his intravenous was still attached. I'm not 100% sure, but he obviously had been killed. They had done what's called in Canada medical assistance in dying, where they kill people. The government pays doctors to kill by lethal injection, a cocktail of a lethal injection, which includes a drug to paralyze the person, then a drug to kill them, and they drown in their own fluids. And Canada, as of today's date, I've been posting about this even since Paul was locked away. Canada, as of Canada Day, July 1st of 2026, Canada has executed extrajudicially by lethal injection as medical care 103,000 human beings. Now, Canada's population is only 41 million in comparison to the United States, which population is 340 million. So Canada kills by lethal injection, pays doctors and nurses to kill by lethal injection 45 people a day, every single day. Now, in 2025, the United States, with a population of 340 million, only executed extrajudicially by lethal injection, or rather executed by lethal injection as capital punishment, 43 people in the whole year, in the whole 360 days. And Canada executes extrajudicially with no judge, no jury, no legal oversight whatsoever, 45 people every single day. And basically anyone can be executed this way. Now, in Paul's case, at this point, they have to be capable of understanding that they're asking to be killed. Paul was never capable of understanding that, and he didn't want to be killed. He had a look of desperation on his face before the nun found out that the police were going to continue the investigation into her document. He was terrified. He could see what was coming. And sure enough, I complained to the coroner, and I complained to the College of Physicians and Surgeons against this Dr. Michael Baker. He was in like a dirty scrubs. He tried to talk to me because I knew he was going to say that Paul was going to die. And I said to him, when I knew I had court on Monday morning, I said, Paul better be alive on Monday morning. Yeah, he was alive on Monday morning, but he wasn't alive by the time I got back from court. So I know that they killed him. So, and then after Paul died, the nun used they took away all of Paul's rights and freedoms as a citizen in Canada, and then they went after me. So they applied to have me designated permanently. Now, as I said, I was the first single mother in history to graduate from law school in British Columbia. I practiced law for 23 years. After I was a government psychologist, and then I went to law school at the University of British Columbia, and I practiced law first as a federal prosecutor. I put lots of people in prison for serious jail time, serious prison time, and then I became a family lawyer for 23 years. But the nun, with all of her monies and all her 2 law firms, the Ottawa lawyer flew in and applied to have me designated permanently what's called a vexatious litigant. Now, that is a very rare and unusual legal categorization where all access to Canadian courts is removed except for the federal courts and the Supreme Court of Canada. And they had a 4-day hearing, 4 full days. Now, I had a heart attack in 2016, and I have 2 medical certificates saying I'm not allowed to be in court for longer than 2 hours per day. And I presented these certificates to the judge. But, you know, her name is Judge Judith E. Hoffman. She didn't care. She said because I had said that I could care for Paul, that meant she didn't have to have any regard for these 2 certificates saying I couldn't appear in court for longer than 2 hours per day. And she went on for 2 full days with these 2 law firms and me. Also, the law firms didn't file any of my responding materials. So I had filed 2 binders, or I had created 2 binders of responding materials. The Charles Gibson, the Ottawa lawyer, said if I wanted the judge to have them, then I could photocopy them myself and present them. And she didn't respond to that at all. Later on, after I left the courtroom, after my 2 hours were up, she ordered them to produce to her some binder of my responding materials. I still don't know what they produced to her. So she went ahead for 2 full days when I couldn't be there beyond 2 hours. And she didn't have my materials in front of her. She didn't care. She designated me permanently a vexatious litigant, which takes away, as I said, my access to Canadian courts. Like the access somebody from Somalia would have, I don't have. I can't respond. You could sue me and I couldn't respond without a judge's permission after practicing law successfully for 23 years. So while all of this was going on, I was posting about euthanasia in Canada because I couldn't understand. You can imagine being a federal prosecutor, finding out that I was in a position where I could have prosecuted someone for capital offenses in the military, and they could have been hanged because hanging was abolished for civilians in Canada in 1976, but not for the military until 1999. So how could we go from a state of affairs where, according to the criminal code, you could be hanged for first-degree murder? We went from that to where doctors are allowed to extrajudicially, no legal oversight whatsoever, no real legal, not by no judge, no jury, physicians, medical doctors who are not trained in the law or in fairness or in evidence are allowed to decide who will live and who will die. And as I said, Canada has killed 103,000 innocent, vulnerable, already mostly poor people. And they want to expand further. They think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. They love it. It's freedom. So what I just wanted to touch upon briefly today is, in response to one of these videos that I've made and my posts about euthanasia in Canada, the government calls it, the Canadian government, in all its evil it's evil. I don't even know what the word, like the Soviet Union. I grew up with the Soviet Union was in place, and nobody ever thought it would be abolished by 1989. But they made up this word called MAiD, medical assistance in dying, and everybody, even people who are against euthanasia, use this ridiculous made-up word. First of all, the word medical assistance in dying. Medical is from the Greek word to heal. So it's a fraudulent misrepresentation of what's done, because you don't heal anybody by killing them. But as I said, I got two posts in response to these posts saying two people had said that their brother, two different people said that their brother had asked to be euthanized and had been euthanized, and that no one should take away that freedom from that person. And that I would even have to come up with an argument against why an innocent, vulnerable Canadian, 96% white, European descent, Canadian born, this is like, if this isn't a Holocaust and a genocide, and I know because my ancestors are all Irish, 100% Irish, just like that evil little piece of shit, Mark Carney. But my ancestors escaped to Canada during our own Irish Holocaust of the potato famine, which was a genocide by the British against the Irish people. Because when the potato crop failed, they removed all the other food stuffs from Ireland. They moved all the beef and the fish and the flour, the wheat. Anyways, so the people that have posted, they've said that it's a matter of freedom, and my response is this, and I said I never in my life ever thought I'd have to argue why innocent, vulnerable people that shouldn't be killed. All it takes is the signature of any doctor, any nurse. They don't need to know the person. They don't need to be an expert in their medical condition. And they can say, and the complete 100% defense against murder is to say, in my opinion, he met the qualifications of euthanasia. That's all he has to say. Now, I know how much effort it takes as a prosecutor just to give someone some jail time for trafficking in narcotics. Possession for the purposes of trafficking was usually the highest offense that I ever prosecuted, and someone would go to jail for 4 years. Anyway, so I wanted to respond in this video to people who say that my tax dollars should be used to kill their brother. In this case, they were both brothers that were killed by the medical doctor. And here's my argument. First of all, there's 3 points, and this is all you need to remember, is no one can consent to being killed because we do not know what death is. We know what medical procedures are, and we can give informed consent. Your doctor can say, well, I can do this procedure, but, there's an 80% chance that such and such will happen, or that you've got all the downsides of what might happen. But we can't do that with death because no one has ever come back from being killed and said, well, this is what happens. Now, in my religion, for example, in Catholicism, and I'm still a Catholic, if you have committed mortal sins and you haven't been forgiven for them, you go to hell and you burn in hell forever. If you haven't been baptized, you go to purgatory forever. And if you've led a good life and you've had your sins forgiven, then you go to heaven with your loved ones. And that's where I believe my loved ones are. And I believe that as sure as I'm sitting here. There's other people in other religions. I think in the Jewish religion, they don't have a belief in an afterlife. And that's what they truly believe. They say, may his memory be a blessing. And that's okay. In the Islamic religion, They believe you go to heaven, and if you've been good, you get to have sex with 72 virgins. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding. And in probably the most popular religion in the world is there's a belief in reincarnation, that you come back as a different animal or a different person depending on how you've lived your life. But the point is, we don't know. So no one, your two brothers, my heart breaks for you, because I had my brother killed right in front of me against his will. But there's no way that that doctor knew what the outcome was of that procedure. And just because it's called medical assistance, and they call it medical assistance in dying, that's bullshit. It's not medical. It's assistance